What was your you need to see a doctor moment? When I was 33 and a half weeks pregnant with twins, I suddenly felt an intense discomfort in my back. I was already keeping track of contractions at home and they seemed unusually frequent, so the doctors advised me to go to the hospital. Earlier in my pregnancy, at around 26 weeks, I'd gone into labor prematurely and had been on a terbutaline pump ever since. My doctor suspected my body had become too accustomed to it, so they admitted me to the hospital to flush it out using magnesium sulfate. I stayed in the hospital from Wednesday to Saturday. After being discharged, I barely made it home before realizing something was seriously wrong. We hurried back to the hospital, but the labor and delivery nurse initially dismissed my concerns as round ligament discomfort and didn't contact my regular doctor, just the on call physician. That night, they decided to put me back on magnesium until my doctor could assess me in the morning. When my doctor arrived the next day, he immediately sensed something was seriously amiss. He rushed me in a wheelchair to his office, which was in the hospital wing. It was then discovered that I was in kidney failure. They quickly arranged for an ambulance to transport me to a hospital 3.5 hours away from home, where they specialized care for high risk pregnancies and a level 3 NICU. Following the delivery, my OB and parentologist visited. Looking back, it became clear that the magnesium sulfate had artificially lowered my blood pressure, masking the severity of my condition. I was diagnosed with preeclampsia, HELLP syndrome, and hydronephrosis. My OB explained that if we hadn't returned to the hospital on Saturday, both my sons and I could have lost our lives that night. Holy wow, it's terrifying to think how easily even her condition could have been missed. Actually, it even was for a while. It was dismissed and then she kept pushing, so go mom. Story 2. During finals week of my first year at college, things took a turn for the worse. I'd finished most of my exams and decided to hit the gym on campus for a workout. About 25 minutes into biking, a sharp ache began throbbing in my lower back. I stopped my session short and slowly made my way back to my dorm, stopping twice despite the gym being just a short distance away. Now, back in my room, I tried to nap, but instead found myself getting increasingly warm, sweaty, and nauseous. Dealing with a UTI at the same time didn't help. I tried to use the bathroom, but ended up crouched in front of the toilet, eventually keeping a plastic bag close by. An hour later, I started getting sick uncontrollably, with screams accompanying each bout. Needing the bathroom urgently, I couldn't make it in time and had to use a nearby towel. I called my boyfriend, who promised to visit with medicine the next day, and then my worried mom. Exhausted, I finally passed out at 1 a.m., waking up sweaty and sore at 1 p.m. to frantic texts from my mom thinking the worst. Summoning the strength, I dragged myself to the dorm showers, struggling with each step due to the discomfort. I managed to wash up but had to sit down to avoid collapsing. Later, my boyfriend finally arrived with some cranberry juice and other remedies. All this time, I hadn't been able to use the toilet properly, resorting to towels, old clothes, and even a bowl in my room, leaving an awful smell. Despite his disgust, my boyfriend helped clean up as best he could. He nursed me through the night, rubbing my neck and bringing me juice, but nothing seemed to ease the discomfort. I kept pleading to go to the hospital, but he urged me to wait another day, citing the expense and hoping it was just a bad cold. Unable to sleep from the discomfort, I pulled an all-nighter while he grumpily went off to his morning exam. By the time I managed to shower and dress, I was barely even functional. I texted a friend to inform the teacher I'd be late, struggling through the discomfort on the way to campus, only to collapse on a hallway couch, unable to stand up again. I emailed my professor, explaining my situation, and my boyfriend rushed back to help. Still resistant to the hospital idea, he suggested the campus wellness center instead. I couldn't even walk there, so he fetched a wheelchair, wheeling me across campus through excruciating discomfort. At the center, a nurse quickly diagnosed a severe kidney infection, urging immediate hospitalization. My boyfriend, now convinced, hurried to get his car while the nurse debated calling an ambulance due to my critical condition. Thankfully, he returned in time and we headed to an urgent care center to confirm the diagnosis and stabilize me before deciding to drive home for further treatment. Diagnosed with a kidney stone causing it, I was admitted to the hospital where an emergency surgeon was called in on a Saturday to remove it. Complications arose due to the severity of it, requiring additional procedures later. After about 5 days in the hospital and ICU and a nearly $100,000 bill, I finally went home, vowing never to go through that experience ever again. Story 3. I was born with weak ankles that turn outward instead of staying straight when I stand or walk. Because of this, my ankles often give out, causing many sprains. So one day, as I was walking out of my room, my ankle gave out again. To avoid spraining it, I fell hard against the wall, bumping my hip. There was a loud pop, a sharp discomfort in my hip and leg, and I couldn't stand up. My brother rushed in after hearing the noise and, unable to lift me, got my dad. My dad insisted I was overreacting and told me to stop being a baby. He forced me to stand, and I felt another pop as my hip slid back into place. I cried out in discomfort, but my dad told me to calm down and walk it off, assuring me I would be fine. But I wasn't fine. Over the next several months, which turned into 3 years, I repeatedly told my parents how much it hurt to walk, sit, and how the discomfort in my hip was keeping me from sleeping. They would give me ibuprofen and tell me that if it didn't heal in a few weeks, they would take me to the doctor. However, they never did and seemed convinced I was faking it. I developed a bad limp, and teachers, friends, and classmates encouraged me to see a doctor. Eventually, I told my mom's parents, who took the situation seriously since they both had experience with hip injuries. Finally, I was taken to the doctor, who confirmed there was muscle damage and likely a hairline fracture. I was prescribed physical therapy, was told that since it had been left to heal improperly for so long, I would probably need surgery in the future. Had my parents believed me and taken me to the doctor when I first asked, my hip would have healed properly and I would be able to walk without discomfort. Story 4. I'd been feeling sick for a while. My housemate in our big shared house pointed out that I looked like Skeletor when I showed him a bump on my ribs. I tend to not worry about things too much, and since I didn't have health insurance, I hoped I'd just start feeling better. Eventually, I went to the ER to get a diagnosis and some meds. The doctor quickly assessed me and said I probably had pneumonia, prescribed antibiotics for secondary infections, and sent me home. On the way out, I mentioned my middle toe hurt. He checked it and said, "It's probably broken, but there's not much we can do. Try not to walk on it too much." So I walked home. The next morning, I woke up to one of the worst discomforts I've ever felt in my leg. I pulled back the sheet and saw my leg had swollen to several times its normal size. Being not so smart at that moment, I got up and thought I'd figure out what to do after using the bathroom. I sat on the toilet feeling dizzy and nauseous, thinking, I'm so tired of feeling sick. Then I heard what I thought were drums. I woke up slowly, not sure where I was at first, thinking maybe I'd gone to a party and forgotten about it. As I regained control, I realized the drums were actually my legs spasming, hitting the toilet as I lay in the shower. At that point, I did the obvious thing. I called my mom. I told her I thought I just had a seizure, my leg was swollen and changing colors, and I didn't know what to do. She said, "Go to the hospital." I agreed and called my housemates until I found one who could drive me. He asked if he should come up to help, but being a genius again, I said, "No, I'll meet you out back. I need to change out of my pajamas." I crawled back to my room and struggled for like 15 minutes to put on my pajamas before he knocked on my door. He looked down at me on the floor and asked if I needed help. I was trying to stand up by gripping the door frame, but the discomfort was too intense and I flopped right back down. He ended up carrying me to the car, driving me to the hospital, helping me fill out paperwork while I struggled, and insisting the receptionists get me a wheelchair. The rest of the story is a blur of me being admitted, feeling really dazed on medication, and having no clue what was wrong. My mom took notes because otherwise I wouldn't remember much. The highlight came a few days later when a doctor came in, examined my leg, and said, "I don't think we'll need to amputate." It finally hit me how serious things were. Later, they told me I had cellulitis and had gone into septic shock, which could have been the end of me. They couldn't identify the cause, so they gave me strong antibiotics known for serious side effects. Story 5. I'd been feeling a bit strange, a dull discomfort for the past few days, but this one was different. It felt like I had been struck, making me see stars, like in the cartoons. Desperate, I went to my next door neighbors, whom I had never spoken to before, and begged the wife to call the hospital for me. Instead, she called her husband. He asked me a few questions, poked me a couple of times, and requested that I jump. When I couldn't, he drove me to the hospital with his wife. En route, he called the hospital, saying, "This is Dr. Anderson. I'm bringing in a patient who needs medical attention. ETA, 10 minutes. He provided a bunch of directions that I can't recall. The wife then revealed that her husband was the medical director of the hospital I was being taken to. Once at the hospital, everything became a blur and I was only partially conscious throughout. I was swiftly taken into surgery and remained hospitalized for about a week. Adding a heartwarming touch to this experience, the medical director's wife stood by me the entire week, even during my moments of sleep or unconsciousness. She also drove me home after I was discharged, and she and her husband became like second parents to me until they retired and moved closer to their daughter. Wow, that's actually pretty sweet. That's a real life guardian angel story right there. From neighbors they never ever spoke to the director of the hospital stepping in and basically saving his life. Story 6. I went to a concert where they used a lot of fireworks. When I got home, I felt fine, but during the night, I could hardly breathe. I asked my boyfriend to take me to the ER. Turns out I had pneumonia, even though I didn't have a fever or anything. I found a primary care doctor, and even after the pneumonia cleared, I still had trouble breathing. After more tests and x rays, he finally said, "Based on your history, it seems like you've always had underlying asthma." It took 27 years to figure that out because my parents and other childhood doctors never believed me when I said my chest hurt during exercise. They never connected the dots as to why I always got bronchitis whenever I got sick. Aw man, it's unfortunate that her symptoms weren't taken seriously a lot earlier in her life, like 27 years. Wow. It's shocking how easily asthma symptoms can be overlooked, but I'm glad she finally got the right diagnosis. And if you're relieved as well and enjoying the video, please don't forget to hit the subscribe and like button for more videos like this. Story 7. I often get leg cramps a few days after I stop working out, especially if I've had a regular routine. These cramps are very agonizing and disrupt my life. The second to last time this happened, I thought, enough is enough. I'm calling my doctor. She reviewed my last labs and noticed I was a bit low in magnesium. She suggested I take a magnesium supplement, drink extra water, and stretch. She said to call her back if it didn't help. So I followed her advice, but the cramps returned after I'd taken a break from running due to some knee discomfort. This time, though, the cramps were so bad I couldn't walk more than a couple hundred feet. I had to call my husband to pick me up from around the block because I couldn't make it back home. I emailed my doctor, explaining that I wanted to get to the bottom of this issue. I asked if she could order some tests to figure out why this kept happening, as I literally could not walk, and I was incredibly frustrated. She agreed and ordered the tests. When the results came back, she called and told me to go straight to the emergency room for rhabdomyolysis. This condition involves muscle proteins entering the bloodstream, which can potentially damage the kidneys if not filtered out. I was admitted to the hospital and stayed for most of the week. We're not sure if my previous leg cramps were milder cases of rhabdo, but it is possible. I still don't know why this keeps happening, but all my autoimmune tests have come back negative, ruling out that possibility. I usually avoid going to the doctor if I can help it, but if something makes me resort to emailing my doctor, it's serious enough to land me in the hospital. Story 8. I had severe endometriosis and adenomyosis, along with cysts and fibroids. I was already scheduled for surgery in a couple months. I had already had 2 surgeries before, so I was no stranger to discomfort and knew it was usually pointless to go to the ER. One night, I felt the worst discomfort I had ever experienced. I couldn't move and I could barely breathe. I tried to sleep but ended up on my sofa making peace with the Lord and sobbing because of the discomfort. My daughter woke up to check on me and insisted on taking me to the ER. She said I looked as white as a ghost and was shaking. At the ER, my doctor admitted me right away and put me on oxygen and morphine. I wasn't getting enough oxygen because I could only take short, quick breaths. They ran every test to rule out anything other than endometriosis. It was so bad that they moved my surgery up to the next couple of weeks. After the surgery, my surgeon said it was so bad and widespread that he had no idea how I was functioning. All this time, I had thought that the worst discomfort I've ever experienced was my 36-hour delivery. Boy, was I wrong. Story 9. It was a cool autumn day and the leaves crunched under my feet as I walked through the park. I like to stay active going for runs and hikes, but lately I felt really tired. I thought it was just stress from work and didn't worry too much about it. One evening after a tough day, I felt a sharp discomfort in my chest. It wasn't the kind of discomfort you could ignore. It was strong, like someone squeezing my heart. I tried to brush it off, thinking it might be indigestion or stress. I took deep breaths, drank water, and even tried lying down. But the discomfort wouldn't go away and started spreading to my left arm. My wife saw I was in discomfort and told me to go to the doctor. I was stubborn and resisted, thinking it was something minor. It's probably just gas, I said, trying to laugh it off, but she didn't believe me. The next morning, I felt even worse. I could barely get out of bed without feeling dizzy. My chest still hurt and I felt a sense of dread. My wife didn't give me a choice this time. You're going to the doctor now, she insisted, practically dragging me to the car. At the clinic, the doctor took one look at me and ordered an EKG. When the results came back, the doctor's face grew very serious. You need to go to the hospital right away, he said. It looks like you're having heart failure. I was shocked. Heart failure? I was only in my 30s. They rushed me to the hospital where more tests confirmed it. I had a blockage in one of my heart arteries and they needed to perform an emergency procedure. As I lay in the hospital bed, hooked up to monitors and IVs, I realized how dangerous it had been to ignore the symptoms. The doctor said I was lucky my wife had insisted on taking me to the doctor. Another hour or two and it could have been fatal. Reflecting on the experience, I learned that our bodies often signal when something is wrong and it's crucial to listen. Ignoring the signs and delaying medical help had put my life at risk. Story 10. I arrived home from school around noon and, not feeling well, fell asleep. I woke up at 4 panicking because I was late for wrestling practice, which started at 3. I rushed out the door and drove back to school. Practice had been going on for an hour and everyone was ready to spar, and I, having just woken up, felt awful and was stiff as a board. My partner was drilling his double leg takedown across the room. The mats were old and didn't quite touch, leaving gaps between them. My partner called in and got a solid double leg, but my ankle got caught in one of the gaps. My body went one way and my knee went the other. He completed his takedown and we hit the mat. His body weight popped my knee back into place. I tapped him, saying, "Get off, man, get off." I screamed and my coach came over to see what was wrong. The whole team gathered around and my partner said, "You can hit me if it makes you feel better." The coach called the sports trainer over. When the trainer arrived, he took one look and said, "I'm not touching that. We need to call the paramedics." The paramedics came and first suggested, if you straighten out your leg, maybe it'll fix itself. That didn't work, so they said, "We're not touching it without an x-ray. You need to see a doctor." Finally, I was taken to the hospital where a doctor slid my kneecap back into place with his thumbs. He said, on the count of 3, but did it on 1. Man, that was an intense day. Story 11. The day after my SVT surgery, I was recovering at home but had a fever that just wouldn't go down. My pulse rate was getting higher too. The surgeon was a bit concerned but decided to wait and see how things went. The next day was the 4th of July and I had to cancel our family trip to see the fireworks. Our city launches the fireworks from the school next door to my workplace, so we always head to the office for a perfect view. A perk of working there, I guess. I hadn't missed one in the 9 years I'd worked there, but that day, I was having trouble breathing and my fever was even higher. Seeing my son's disappointment was heartbreaking. The next morning, my symptoms got worse. I was gasping for air even while sitting down, so I went to the hospital. It turned out I had picked up a lung infection, likely at the hospital where I had my SVT surgery. The air handler in the OR was faulty. One of my lungs had effectively collapsed and the other was heading in the same direction. It was getting worse, and if it were the olden days before modern medical care, it would have been dangerous within a couple of days. They gave me a Z-Pack, and within 48 hours, I was back to normal. Story 12. I had just undergone a small surgery to clean out a cyst on my shoulder. They didn't numb me properly, so I felt everything and kept telling them I was hurting, but they ignored me. Afterwards, the doctor hurried me out and said I could resume normal activities. They packed my shoulder with gauze and told me to remove it myself the next morning. Back home, I was in intense discomfort and couldn't move my arm or stop the flow of liquid. I didn't want to complain since the doctor assured me I'd be fine, so I took some melatonin to sleep. The next morning, my entire arm and fingers were swollen to 1.5 times their normal size. I had a fever, couldn't speak clearly, struggled to breathe, and my heart was racing, and I was in a lot of discomfort. Despite this, I foolishly went to work. My boss took one look at me and immediately sent me to the ER. Turns out my arm was infected, and that's how a simple surgery turned into an unexpected trip to the ER. Well, if you like these stories, I got more for you. YouTube thinks you're going to love this. I'll catch you in that video, and big thanks for hanging out with me on this one.